Thank you for listening to Soho Bites, the only podcast in the world, as far as we're aware, dedicated to talking about films set in Soho, the beating heart of bohemian cosmopolitan London. If you would like to support the show, you can do this in the form of a star rating or review at sohobitespodcast.com/review, or if you'd like to put a small amount of money where your mouth is, you can do that at sohobitespodcast.com/donate. Donations can be from as little as £3, which will buy, at London prices, about half a drink for one of our thirsty guests. You may hear some different URLs in the upcoming episode, but by far the easiest way is to follow one of those links. They are again sohobitespodcast.com/review and sohobitespodcast.com/donate. Thank you for your continued support and enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome to episode 26 of Soho Bites. Soho Bites is the podcast in which we talk to people who love Soho and people who love film. My name is Dominic DeLargy, and a listener has pointed out to me that there's a restaurant in New York, at JFK Airport in fact, called Soho Bites. I assume it's that other Soho with a capital S and capital H. I know I should probably take some kind of legal action, but I'm going to let them off. Live and let live. That's my motto. But if you ever happen to find yourselves at JFK, you, as a Soho Bites podcast listener, can go to the Soho Bites restaurant and quote promo code yummy yummy in my tummy to claim your exclusive 0% discount. I don't know what the weather's like where you are, but here in London, home of the original Soho, it is hot, hot, hot. In fact, you might even say it's too hot to handle, which, by an amazing coincidence, is the title of the film we're looking at in this episode. Is it a coincidence, though? Or do I carefully choose the film for each episode to match the prevailing weather conditions? No, it's a coincidence. As the lockdown restrictions continue to be dismantled bit by bit, it was glorious to be able to go to a screening of a film. And not just any film, though, and not just any screening. Last week, we hauled ourselves out to Fontaines cocktail bar in Dalston to attend a Lobotomy Room screening of Too Hot to Handle, the 1960 B movie starring Jayne Mansfield. The Lobotomy Room is a regular film night hosted at Fontaines by DJ, journalist and promoter Graham Russell. I took my trusty tape recorder along to the screening, of course, so in the first half of the programme, we'll be hearing a little bit of that evening and about the Lobotomy Room film nights from its daddy, Graham Russell. Why is it called Lobotomy Room, you may ask? Well, I did ask that, so stick around. And for the second half of the show, the traditional film chat section, I met up with Graham again, this time in Soho a couple of days later, to talk about Too Hot to Handle and his deep and abiding love for it. So press pause on your device, grab yourself a white lady, other cocktails are available, and come back for all that stuff I've just been talking about after this jazzy flourish. The Lobotomy Room is a regular film night with a motto: bad films for bad people. And its Facebook page says it's faster, further, filthier, it's sleazy, it's grubby, it's trashy, you'll love it, a tawdry good time guaranteed. Graham Russell, the sleazy evil genius behind this night of foul debauchery, began doing guest DJ spots at Cockabilly, London's only queer rockabilly night, back in 2008, and he gradually worked his way towards doing his own club night and now a regular film night, which is staged once a month in the Bamboo Lounge at Fontaines. Graham describes the Lobotomy Room as a low-brow, mixed/queer, mondo trasho punkabilly booze party. I don't know what most of that means, but I had a very good time. On our arrival in the Bamboo Lounge, my friends and I were amused to see... On our arrival in the Bamboo Lounge, my friends and I were shocked and appalled to be assaulted by the sight of several oiled, half-naked men wrestling with each other. This was on the screen though, not in real life. It's quite a small venue. I later learned that these were films made back in the 1950s by photographer and filmmaker Bob Miser, who often got himself into legal difficulties for producing homoerotic material with his company AMG, which stood for Athletic Model Guild. Cocktails were ordered. I can report that the dirty martinis were delicious and came with some of the fattest olives I've ever seen. And then we settled ourselves down for the film.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for coming to the Lobotomy Room. Too Hot to Handle has a complicated history. I'll just talk you through some of it briefly. The quality of this DVD is decent, it's tolerable, but to put it into context, it's a film that's kind of fallen through the cracks, it's unloved, it's forgotten, which is kind of what we specialize in here. So you know that if you've been here before. This was a full, not Technicolor, but Eastman color film when it was first issued in 1960. But the version that is circulating in the UK, that's readily available, is black and white. But in Europe, you can buy DVDs that are in glorious full color, but they're only available dubbed in German. Oh. So that's the trade-off. So I think you'd rather watch it in English in black and white. So the director, this is a competently directed film. The director is Terence Young, who would go on to direct multiple James Bond movies after this, including Dr. No and From Russia with Love. In terms of Jayne Mansfield's career, first of all, Jayne Mansfield is the Lobotomy Room saint, our kind of icon. We had special events celebrating the 50th anniversary of her death and stuff like that. So she is beloved here. And this is a good role for her. It's not a comedic role. It's a dramatic role, and I think she acquits herself pretty well. She has some really good dramatic moments. She gets to cry. She gets to sing and dance. She wears some really good painted-on outfits. And in fact, watch for the dress she wears in the Too Hot to Handle number. It's a softer core version of the one she wore in her Las Vegas act around this time. They had to add some extra detailing for the censors, but it would have just been flesh-colored chiffon with a bit of sequins scattered around. As for the rest of the cast, there's Christopher Lee, who by now had already played Dracula for Hammer Horror, and he'd go on to do more Hammer Horror and play villains in James Bond movies and stuff like that. The Austrian actor Karl Boehm, he plays the journalist in this. He would go on to do Peeping Tom within the next year or so, which is a really major British horror film. It's like the British equivalent of Psycho, and have a long, distinguished career in European cinema and work with people like Fassbinder. And then we come to Barbara Windsor, who was only 22 in this, and this is long before Peggy Mitchell on EastEnders. And her voice in this might surprise you, because she's not talking in a Cockney voice at all, to the extent that I wonder if she's been dubbed by someone else. But she would have had elocution lessons. She went to drama school, so maybe it is. I'll let you be the judge of that. I would love to say we see glimpses of real-life Soho in 1959 in this film, but we really don't. This was all filmed on a soundstage somewhere in Shepperton or Pinewood. But there is a sequence where Jayne, it's like a kind of suspenseful sequence where Jayne is filmed actually in front of the Houses of Parliament. We can see her juxtaposed against Redland and buses and black cabs, and it's really bizarre to see her in that context. But anyway, I really appreciate you guys coming. Keep following us on social media to find out what we're showing next. And you can hit play. Ruby, thanks.
And we were off, and the film seemed to be very well received by the audience. 93 minutes later, Too Hot to Handle was coming to its breathless conclusion. I don't want to give too much of the plot away, especially the ending, but you can probably tell from this dramatic and emotive closing music that it's all deeply moving stuff, as Midnight Franklin, played by Jayne Mansfield, stands alone in the darkened club. She picks up a rose from the floor, gently kisses it, and heads slowly towards the exit. Once we'd all managed to stop weeping, I grasped my microphone and shoved it forcefully into the face of a young chap who'd been watching the film for the very first time and asked him what he thought. This, as it turns out, was the podcaster Nick Randall of the Scratch and Sniff podcast.
I quite enjoyed it. I mean, it's of its time, obviously, but I knew nothing about it. I thought it was going to be a bit, I don't know, of its time. But then it suddenly got really exciting, and there was a rival gangland war. And
Where did you find it exciting?
bear in mind, I have had a few cheeky cocktails tonight.
Okay.
You're implying that I shouldn't have felt like this.
No, I just think is it alcohol-induced excitement?
Yeah, possibly, but I was trying to judge it on its merits of the day, and I thought there was a bit of a message there about, exploitation of women, and it was the gangland stuff was very exciting. I wanted the main guy to find out who the baddies were, and he did, and then there was a gun, and blah 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 blah. And I like the set. I like the Soho set that was done in Shepperton or wherever it was. It looked really good. I mean, it was clearly on a budget, the film, but I felt they did pretty
Small
well.
budget.
Yeah.
Oh, they got the pawns back on.
Oh, we got the porn back on now.
But Nick
Excuse
has to go
me.
now.
Whoopsie porn.
At this point, because of the heady combination of the 1950s homoerotica and the cocktails he'd drunk, Nick became incoherent and insensible, so I managed to grab Graham as he passed by instead, who spirited me away to a small backstage room. Tell me where we are. I'm looking at leopard print, I'm looking at a pink flamingo, a gentleman in some kind of sailor cap. Why have you brought me here? What's going on?
Well, I mean, you know what? This film takes place in a Soho burlesque joint in 1959 called the Flamingo Club. And a lot of the action takes place in the strippers' dressing rooms, and we're in a stripper's dressing room right this moment that's painted pink with pink flamingos. What more do you want?
I feel honoured to be here.
How much more authentic to the spirit of the film could we be? There's a picture of Jayne Mansfield on the wall right there. I mean, she is like the patron saint of Lobotomy Room. And I mean, Lobotomy Room, it's a film club, but it's also a dance party. I DJ, but that's been on hold for quite a while now because of the pandemic.
Oh, I forgot about that pandemic thing.
Yeah. So really, I mean, even the film club has been on ice for a long time, and we had to cancel our. So
the film club, so Lobotomy Room is a film club.
It's a film club, and it's a separate. I mean, I started out here doing DJing and doing a dance party, and then Ruby, the proprietress of this place, she was thinking, we've got a projector, we've got seats and everything, and a screen. And I said, well, I've got ideas. I'm happy to take it on. So I kind of took over. I hijacked the film club aspect as well. And we call that, Lobotomy Room Goes to the Movies or the Lobotomy Room Film Club. But it's both. I do, I wet my beak in a bit of everything, when I can, whenever the pandemic permits me to. So yeah, it's like.
So why Lobotomy Room? Why?
I mean, that name came back. I'm Canadian, and I grew up watching SCTV. It was like the Canadian version of Saturday Night Live, but a lot better, a lot funnier, a lot crueler, a lot blacker, like black comedy.
So a current affairs satirical thing.
Yes, and they'd give these like fake ads for this hotel or this club, and they'd say, and our punk night, the Lobotomy Room downstairs. And I thought, oh my God, Lobotomy Room. If I ever do a club night, I'm going to call it Lobotomy Room. So like 30 years later, that's what I did.
And it grew out of, you had something called Cockabilly.
Yes, you did used to do. I mean, I think my DJing debut was probably at a gay rockabilly night called Cockabilly. That sort of set me on my path, and I like that whole imagery of, homoeroticism, sleaze, lowbrow music like surf, rockabilly, punk, rhythm and blues, twist music, whatever. One of the things I'm committed to in every venture I do is I want to bring back sleaze. I want to bring back adult content. And
but isn't adult content more prevalent than ever these days?
Well, but not on the the club scene. I don't feel like it is. And I mean sometimes I also will show Betty Page stripping and dancing, or Tempest Storm and everything. But I really do. I like things to be confrontational, and so I think male nudity it still challenges people, and I do want to challenge people. You're coming to the film club. That's great. I expect you to be hip enough to handle it. It is hardcore. It is hardcore, and that's what I'm here for. That's what I aim to do.
And a couple of days later, I met up with Graham again to talk about the film in a bit more detail. But first, a bit of background. Hello, this is what's known as a mid-roll ad. It's one of those annoying interruptions that's inserted retrospectively at just the wrong point. And the reason for it is that Soho Bites takes up hours of time every month, and I'm hoping you might be able to support the show. There are two ways you can do this. One is for free, and it's to leave the show a star rating or kind review. You can do that at sohobitespodcast.com/review. Or if you'd like to assist financially to help cover our costs, you can do that at sohobitespodcast.com/donate. Thank you very much. Apologies for the interruption, and back to the episode.
Hot, hot, much too hot to handle. The lady's a dish, too hot to handle.
In the late 50s, Jayne Mansfield was a major Hollywood star, and Too Hot to Handle, known in the US as Playgirl After Dark, was one of two films she made in the UK in 1959 and 60. In both of these films, she played roles that were slightly different from the comedic sex kitten part she was known for. The other of these two films, The Challenge, or as it's called in the US, It Takes a Thief, is a bona fide noir thriller in which she plays the manipulative boss of a criminal gang, using her womanly ways to seduce and corrupt unsuspecting male victims. In Too Hot to Handle, although it's still somewhat of a departure from her usual type of role, we are in much more familiar Jayne Mansfield territory, as we're treated to a couple of musical numbers in which she sashays her voluptuous curves around the stage of the Pink Flamingo strip club, delighting the dirty old men in the audience.
Too hot to handle, her tenderest touch, a tropical thrill.
Directed by British director Terence Young, Too Hot to Handle centres on the rivalry between two neighbouring Soho strip clubs. The aforementioned Pink Flamingo is owned by suave Johnny Solo, a Sandhurst type played by Leo Genn, and is managed by the humourless Novak, played by Christopher Lee. Over the road we have the Diamond Horseshoe Club, run by Johnny's nemesis, the spivvy Diamonds Dielli, played by Sheldon Lawrence. Into the mix is thrown a French reporter, played by Austrian actor Karl-Heinz Böhm, who's in town to do a story about Soho nightlife.
Come in, no one's taking a bath. Hello, now there. New problems?
Bank book, Danny.
No, old problems. Oh, this is Mr. Robert Jouvel of Paris Quick. This is Paul Novak, my manager.
Hello.
He's going to write about us. You know the sort of thing. Starts as a boost, ends as a knock.
Oh, sure. Read all about it. Sexy, sordid Soho. England's greatest shame. Send for the missionaries before it's too late.
Forgive my manager, Mr. Jouvel. When he was a child, he was bitten by a newspaper.
Well, they always say the English have strange eating habits.
There are all sorts of subplots and suggestions of backstories in this film that never quite satisfy, and it sometimes feels as though an attempt has been made to squeeze too much into it. Some of the supporting characters and their stories do get fleshed out and resolved, such as that of a character called Ponytail, a very young wannabe exotic dancer played by Barbara Windsor, who catches the sinister eye of a local gangster. But much of the goings-on backstage at the Pink Flamingo doesn't quite ring true. There's an ongoing feud between different groups of dancers which we never quite get to the bottom of, and we're shown brief snatches of some of the performers' lives and their motivations, but never more than that. There's one who's stripping to pay her way through art school, for example, and in the case of one character, Cynthia, the dialogue hints at a backstory so dark that we're left wondering if we'll ever find out more about her, but we never do.
I was in a juvenile court once, and there was this old dish. She must have been 100. And she looks at me through her glasses and she said, "My dear, if you don't mend your ways, I'll fear you'll end up an outcast from society." Me, a refugee from 14 camps, and she's afraid I'll end up as an outcast from society.
Well, after my martini hangover had subsided, it takes at least 48 hours at my age, I got together again with Graham to get his take on Too Hot to Handle. We met up in the church of St Anne's on Wardour Street, and as you'll be able to hear in the background, Quite a few other people had decided to meet there too, including a group of jovial but noisy drunks. I began by asking Graham for a synopsis of the film.
Too hot to handle.
Okay, so the main plot is there's a violent rivalry between two Soho burlesque clubs. The Flamingo Club, run by Johnny Solo.
Johnny Solo.
Yeah. And conveniently, just opposite the street, directly opposite, is the Diamond Horseshoe, run by Diamonds Dinelli. These two clubs are sort of battling it out for dominance, I guess. And out of the two, we're meant to sympathize more with Johnny Solo, and he's the more honorable of these two club owners. But what he doesn't realize is his right-hand man, Novak, played by Christopher Lee,
Boo.
is actually a traitor who is reporting back to Diamonds Dinelli, and he's in on this attempt to get him out, to take over the scene. That's sort of the main plot, and then after that, there's a surprising amount of subplots crammed into this.
It's quite sophisticated plot-wise, isn't it? I mean, the number of plots that kind of intertwine.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. There's like a love story between Johnny Solo and his headlining showgirl, Midnight Franklin, who's played by Jayne Mansfield.
Same old gentleman Johnny. Nobody ever locks up the place but him. And nobody ever puts off the lights but him.
Silly superstition, I suppose.
I like it. I like to watch you.
That's because you've got simple tastes.
Sure, like you, for instance.
Like me. And I don't get it. I could walk out of that door and any man in London would be glad to fall into your lap.
Suppose I said I don't want any man in London. Only one.
Then I'd say you were badly brought up.
And then after that, a French reporter, played by Karl-Heinz Boehm, I never know how to say his name, the Austrian actor.
Yeah, I think it's Boehm.
Boehm, okay. Who went on to do Peeping Tom after this, and then, a really long, distinguished career in European cinema and working with people like Fassbinder. He plays this reporter who's come to do an expose on the Soho burlesque scene, and then he falls in love with this mysterious Austrian dancer with a secret past. That's another subplot. And then I guess the other subplot is Johnny Solo has this really sinister, menacing, sadistic investor in the club, Mr. Arpel. He's kind of pimping out his dancers to this investor to keep him happy, and that's unfortunate in that one of these girls is Ponytail, played by Barbara Windsor. So I think there's a good 3 or 4 plots happening at once.
So he's not as honourable as we think he is, Johnny Solo.
Yeah, he's like a flawed, he's an amoral anti-hero, I guess you'd call him that.
Because he talks about, doesn't he, having fought his way up from the bottom. He's not the officer type that he appears to be. He's kind of, so he must have some kind of street fighting credentials to have got to that position.
He's from the School of Hard Knocks or something.
Yeah, all that stuff. University of Life. So you love this film, don't you?
I do. I think I've got a high tolerance for bad movies. More than
you should
a
work
lot
on
of
this
people.
program.
I value it as like a piece of pulp, pulp cinema, trash cinema. I think it's a fun document of its time. I think it's a great star vehicle for Jayne Mansfield as well, and she's a real fixation of mine. So I love it on those levels.
So Jayne Mansfield, at this point, she obviously is a big American Hollywood star. She did these 2 films over here, didn't she? Could you tell me how that came about? Why was she hawked out to the UK? And could you tell me about the other film as well, The Challenge?
She was signed to 20th Century Fox in Hollywood, and by 1959 things were cooling a bit for her. It was like a lull in her career. There was no projects on the horizon at 20th Century Fox. They just farmed her out to make these films in the UK. I mean, looking back, no one could have seen this at the time, but looking back, it was a sign that things weren't so great for her. And I mean, in real terms, as an A-list star, she had probably 18 good months or 24 good months maximum. So people look at these films as the beginning of her slipping as a major star. And from here on in, it would be more low-budget European cheapy productions. So she came here in 1959. I think the first one was Too Hot to Handle, and that was followed by The Challenge. And that's like a heist thriller. It's more of a crime. Well, they're both crime thrillers.
Yeah.
This one's more about like a heist criminal gang, and she's the leader of the gang, which is fun. That's just a fun idea.
She plays like a kind of honey trap girl, doesn't she, in the gang, but also is obviously at the top of the gang.
And you know she's serious because she's wearing a brunette wig, so and glasses.
Yeah, which means that she's been intelligent.
Both of those films were issued in the U.S. under different titles. Too Hot to Handle was retitled Playgirl After Dark, and The Challenge was retitled It Takes a Thief. But these do represent like a downturn in her fortunes. And I would say, I do think people overemphasize that when they talk about her, because really, she was more of a media figure or a celebrity, like an all-purpose celebrity. So films were only one part of her portfolio. So whenever they dried up, she was still earning big money doing residencies in Las Vegas, doing nightclub tours. She'd cut the ribbon at shopping centers, at department stores, that kind of thing. So she stayed a major star, a big public figure, a big celebrity, right up until she died. She was still in gossip columns and making headlines and that kind of thing.
She opened the Illuminations at Blackpool, didn't she, in 1960? She's a bizarre thought.
And she cleaned up doing stuff like that.
Too Hot to Handle is obviously clearly a Soho film. The Challenge has a little bit. It has a fantastic opening scene where she's in bed with Anthony Quayle and there's a neon outside the window and they're smoking in bed and everything. And then she's also, there's club scenes in Soho. So it's also a bit of a Soho film. Was it inevitable that Jayne Mansfield, if doing films in England, would do these Soho-type films?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's funny to think these films could have so easily been made with Diana Dors playing her roles, but just the way it worked out that Jayne was available and was on loan over here doing them. Yeah, I guess the whole sex goddess thing is synonymous with the vice side of Soho. It suits her well. It is fascinating how especially Too Hot to Handle sort of perpetuates the myths about Soho. I mean, not a single frame of it shot in Soho. And
Yeah.
I don't think any of it is. It's all done on a soundstage somewhere. But the visual shorthand is neon signs, burlesque houses, and then it's plot elements like organized crime, clip joint hostesses ripping people off over drinks, but it ticks all the boxes. And that would have been relevant for British audiences. But then you think this film was exported to Europe and America, so it's like perpetuating the myth of Soho abroad as well.
There are these different versions that you've touched on. I've seen a colour version of this film in German. It looks fantastic, but I can't understand a word of it. And the version that we've seen, the version that you screened the other night, is black and white and looked like a second-generation copy as well. Do you know the story behind how has this come to be? All these different versions of the names and.
I do know some of it, and it's an incredibly complicated. There's multiple versions. Just before I left the house, I did some last-minute Googling, and in fact, what I've established is the version that's circulating here and that I showed at the club is the American version. It's actually Playgirl After Dark. That's the edit. We've seen the American edit.
Okay.
It is about 93 minutes long, and the original British version, Too Hot to Handle, is 104 minutes long. So there's been some minutes shaved off here and there, and the American version, Playgirl After Dark, didn't even hit the cinemas in the US until 1961, and that was partly because censorship worries. So
they have more stringent censorship over there.
Different. Yeah, the Hays Code was still in place in the US. And so there is a striptease number where it's like a harem girl type thing. And the screen keeps going misty and cloudy during that number. And that is, I think, there's a bit too much implied nudity in that number for the American audiences at the time. And that was their solution to make the screen go foggy. And also, why the film's in black and white? Like, I don't know why they would make the American version black and white. One theory, which I tend to believe, is at a certain point, it would have been made commercially available for TV. Everyone would have still had black and white TVs at the time. So a black and white print of the film was created, and that's, for some reason, that's the version that's survived.
And that would be cheaper to produce, to distribute to TV stations, I suppose, or something.
So that's one theory. And then, of course, there is a German language DVD circulating, which is in color, but dubbed into German. But surely in a vault somewhere, there is a pristine Eastman color, British, uncut English language.
There must be people listening to this programme, because I know we have listeners from real streets and talking pictures in the BFI. Maybe they know where that film is. That would be amazing to find that.
Yeah, I mean, just as an aside, in 1999, the BBC's Arena strand did a whole series. They did 3 documentaries around Christmas time, and I watched them at the time on TV. They did a documentary about Jane, a documentary about Diana Dors, and a documentary about Anita Ekberg. And I rewatched the Jayne Mansfield one last night, and they show clips from Too Hot to Handle in color, in English. So they might have access. They clearly had access to it because they cut it into this documentary. So it must exist somewhere. But what's sad about a film like this is, it's quite unloved. It's fallen through the cracks. It's probably in public domain on some level. It's hard to get someone motivated to invest in a digitally remastered Blu-ray, DVD of this, much as I would like it, much as you would like it. We're a niche audience for something like this.
The Too Hot to Handle number, where she is the best bit of the film, when she's wearing that slinky, invisible spray-on dress, and there's those chaps lighting her cigarettes and everything. It's clearly ripped off, or an homage, or whatever, to Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend.
Yeah.
I know that you kind of prefer her to be judged outside of the prism of Marilyn Monroe, but she's obviously aping that. I don't know whose decision that was, but I mean, isn't Jayne Mansfield, or wasn't she a kind of bargain bucket Marilyn Monroe?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, one of the things that's interesting is whenever you read film books from, say, the 80s or something, and they're very quick to sort of dismiss Marilyn's imitators. And I think as you dig deeper into these people's films, you sort of get to appreciate that actually Jayne Mansfield, Mamie Van Doren, Cleo Moore, Cherie North, whoever you want to cite as an example, they were interesting and unique in their own rights, And, Jane, that's how she got her start. She was almost more like a parody of Marilyn. And I think maybe that's why some Marilyn fans resent her, because it's almost like she's taking the piss in some ways.
It's almost like a cod sexy. She's sort of doing pretend baby sexy.
I always say it's like, Sex Kitten gone berserk. I don't know, how seriously did people take it or want to take it? I think, she was having a laugh. That's part of her appeal. I think she had an innate understanding of kitsch and camp. Before these things were widespread, I think she just innately knew what they were. And I think she also had like an innate understanding of stereotypes and typecasting and how you could make these things work for you. And for a long time, they did work for her. You could say, we don't know how her career would have panned out because she was dead by 34. But, she was still working.
Young.
Yeah, she was still working right up till the end. And, maybe not in demand in terms of films, but still in demand in terms of nightclub appearances and that kind of thing.
And it wasn't a tragic death in the sense, obviously it's tragic she was young and she had kids in the car, but it wasn't a tragic death in the sense she didn't die alone with tablets. It was just a freak accident, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, she had slid into alcoholism by that stage, so that's quite dark. But, people do bounce back from that kind of thing as well. So she'd be 88 or 89 now. So she's rough.
No age these days, though, is it?
She's rough. She's the same age as Brigitte Bardot and Sophia Loren. It would be fascinating to see what would have happened had she survived.
Yeah. So this whole thing about her being a gay icon, lots of women become gay icons, ostensibly straight women. People like Judy Garland is the classic one, and Barbra Streisand, Bette Midler.
Okay.
So what is it? What constitutes gay iconism?
Well, I'm not claiming she is for me. I'm not saying she is she's quite niche, She's the thinking man's gay icon, let's say, She's the outsider gay icon. But it's significant that when Kenneth Anger would put out that first edition of Hollywood Babylon, it was her he put on the cover. And whenever John Waters was sort of piecing together his 300-pound drag queen leading lady, Divine, he said, my image for her was going to be Godzilla meets Jayne Mansfield. And Divine's gone on the record saying, she was a big inspiration. So with her, I think it's the artifice, the campiness, the kitschiness.
She's almost like a drag queen, isn't she?
Yeah.
She's incredibly sexy as well, but she was manufactured for that kind of straight male gaze. But it is incredibly over the top.
And she makes those cooing noises, and it's like she realizes how absurd she is.
Orgasmic faces.
And she's in on the joke in a lot of ways. So I think it's that side of things. She pushes it so far.
So let's move on from Jayne Mansfield, because there are more people than Jayne Mansfield involved in making this film, obviously. In your blog post about Too Hot to Handle, you described Leo Genn, who played Johnny Solar, as having a charisma bypass. Does that sum up your view on his performance?
Well, I'm the first to admit I don't know anything about him. But to me, he seems like such an odd choice. Jayne Mansfield is pining for him. and it's hard to see what the attraction is, what the appeal is. He just doesn't seem as tough and sexy. And for a 1959 audience in Britain, did he kind of embody those qualities? I mean, I can't see it in the present day, but he's not terrible. But he seems like an odd casting choice.
I think he's quite terrible
for that role.
And he has this ridiculous affectation. It's like his character is based around him twanging. He's got an elastic band in his hand all the time. You can imagine him kind of saying, well, I think my character would have something that he does, and this is the thing I'm having. Oh, there's an elastic band, I'll use this. Oh, so annoying.
We're constantly being told how suave he is and all this stuff. And I mean, when he calls Midnight Franklin 12 o'clock and all that stuff.
Yeah, that is terrible, isn't it? And we've got Christopher Lee, of course. He's kind of doing almost the same role as in Beat Girl. Have you seen Beat Girl?
I have seen Beat Girl, and I love Beat Girl. And I think it's so fascinating that these films came out the same year, 1960. And it just shows, like, obviously these ideas about Soho were just really in the air. These two burlesque-themed sexploitation, and whatever you want to call them, films came out at the same time with Christopher Lee playing very similar roles. Like but I mean, he specialized in playing sinister, villainous roles.
And Beat Girl is also a little bit around the coffee shop scene, which ties in with other films of that era.
It's concerned with younger people for sure, and it's quite a juvenile delinquent film in a lot of ways. It's more post-Rebel Without a Cause, post-Brigitte Bardot.
Yeah, the kind of kids looking for kicks kind of thing.
Yeah,
I like Beat Girl. I think Beat Girl is a much better film than it gets credit
objectively, for. Yeah. They've both got their charms, for sure.
And then there's Babs.
Barbara Windsor. And she's 22 here, playing 16. And this is quite a few years before Carry On, and many, many decades before Peggy Mitchell. Barbara Windsor made all kinds of claims about working with Jayne Mansfield. Her idea was Jayne Mansfield was threatened by me because I was so young and so pretty. And, I'm keeping an open mind. Who am I to question it? But I mean, she does say that Jayne Mansfield insisted that we couldn't both have platinum blonde hair. But you look at the finished film, and Barbara Windsor's hair couldn't be much more white than it is. So I'm not sure how that works. And I mean, in terms of an age difference, it's 4 years. So I really doubt that Jayne was as threatened by Barbara Windsor's youth and beauty as Barbara Windsor suggests. But there is, on IMDb, it does say that Barbara Windsor's role was bigger, and Jayne Mansfield insisted it be cut down.
Okay.
But once again, I don't see the proof evidence of that in the film. I think Barbara Windsor's she's a supporting character, and she does get plenty of screen time. I don't see any documented proof of that claim, but that's out there, that's in circulation.
I think Midnight Franklin is possibly supposed to be older than 26 because she talks about, she got that scene where Babs says to her, in her terrible accent, she says, "Oh, yes. Gee, why do you stay in this business?"
Yeah.
Gee, Miss Midnight, this is the chance I've been waiting for.
I know. I even know the dialogue. Baby, I can get you a spot in a movie. Baby, you be nice to me, and I'll fix it so you get to be the leading lady in the promised land. And the next morning, they hand you your taxi fare, and it's, don't call us, we'll call you.
Well, it doesn't have to be like that. Not always. At least I've got a chance to be seen. Back home, it was just the boys in the street, errand boys with clammy hands, all trying to grow mustaches so they could look older. I mean, what future has a girl got out there?
Future? I've seen 100 girls go out those doors with creeps who call themselves producers, impresarios, and the rest. Little Mr. Fix-Its, all of them. Some of the girls came back with promises as long as a slide trombone. One came back with a baby. Some never came back at all. But nobody ever came back with a future. And you're not going to be any different, Ponytail. Am I getting through? Okay, Lolita, but watch yourself in the clinches, that's all.
Miss Midnight?
Mm-hmm.
Would you tell me something? After all you said about this kind of place, what keeps you here?
Well, I guess that's the $64 question, kid. And even when I'm looking at him, I kind of ask myself the same thing. You know, I never seem to get an answer, except that fish gotta swim. Birds gotta
swim.
Yeah, birds gotta fly. Yeah.
And that awful piano music that comes in whenever she's being sincere.
Anytime there's anything romantic happening, that music swells up. Well, yeah, I mean, they never mention how old Midnight Franklin is meant to be, but Jayne plays it in a very world-weary...
Yeah, she's been around the block a few times. And
a friend of mine who was there that night pointed out that the scenes between Barbara Windsor and Jayne Mansfield have a kind of showgirls quality, like the ones between Elizabeth Berkley and Gina Gershon and Showgirls.
Have you got much to say about Terence Young, the director?
Not that much. I mean, I think he does a fairly credible job. It moves along pretty fast. I almost think, you know how James Bond is like always portrayed as this amoral anti-hero, and that is kind of how Johnny Solo is presented as well. So maybe he's like a proto-Bond.
Because he did go on to direct some Bond films, isn't he?
Yeah, he did
Terence
the early
Young.
ones like Dr. No and From Russia with Love. Yeah.
Anything else you want to say?
Well, I would just say when you're asking what you like about this film, I do think, in the grand scheme of Jayne Mansfield's career, this film is often singled out as the beginning of her downslide. But it's such a great role for her in that, she is kind of recognized as a brilliant comedienne. She's funny. I've even heard people that don't like her have to admit that. But this is a dramatic role. I think she acquits herself well. She gets to cry in some scenes. She gets to sing and dance. So, if nothing else, I do think Too Hot to Handle is like a showcase for Jayne. And it's a shame that more roles like that didn't come along after this, really.
Thank you to Graham Russell for coming on Soho Bites and also for hosting such fun events. Details about the Lobotomy Room film nights and links to Graham's Twitter and blog are on the show notes, where you can also find the full-length black and white version of Too Hot to Handle. That's all in the usual place. Of course, it's sohobytespodcast.com. Also on the show notes at sohobytespodcast.com, I might get a jingle made for that, are links from where you can support the show with teeny-weeny donations. And you can also subscribe there too. If you feel compelled to leave us a star rating and a kind review but don't know how to go about it, I'd love you to do that. So I've made it very easy for you. Just go to ratethispodcast.com, that's ratethispodcast.com/Soho Bites, and all will become clear. Remember, you can tweet us with your comments and suggestions for Soho-related films and features on @BytesSoho, or email us at sohobytespodcast@gmail.com. Soho Bites is produced by me, Damdalagi, and is based on an original idea by Dr. Jing'an Young, who has just had a baby. Congratulations! See you soon, and bye for now.